Hello, welcome. We'll give everyone just a few moments here to hop in. If you are joining us, drop in the chat where you're joining us from. We always love to see where people are attending from. And I'm going to get my screen share up here. Austin, nice. Omaha. Ooh, very cool. Let me get this going.
Ooh, nice desert. From the Toronto airport. Safe travels. Love that.
All right.
One of the best zoo in the world, period. I need to go to the zoo.
Yes.
About that time. I'm like falling out and I'm like, I need to go to the zoo.
Quick screen check. Can you all see my screen here? We are kicking off our live discussion on creating impactful internal podcasts. We're going to give everyone a few more minutes to join. Also, too, I was talking to Kaylee, Devin, and Addison. I wanted to just flood the chat with good news. So if something exciting has happened to you this last week, something you're really proud of, or something you're looking forward to, let us know in the chat. What's something exciting that has happened to you lately? Alberta, Canada, Columbus, Ohio. Hello. Started a new job this week. Yeah. Got promoted. Congratulations, Tess. Engaged. Congrats. Oh my gosh, this is making my heart so happy. We should always start with just what's a piece of good news that's happened to you.
Yeah, I know. I love the
Happy birthday, Katie. Love this so much. Got engaged after 10 years. Congratulations. One my first time saying the word. Yeah. Keep them coming. I'm going to do a couple logistics, housekeeping stuff, but keep the good news flying in the chat. We love to see it. First of all, we just want to say we are so glad that you are all here. We know everybody that is joining us today has really busy schedules, right? You have deadlines to meet, emails to send, you have things to do. We're just really grateful that you are taking the time out of your day to spend the hour with us. We are so excited about today's discussion. We're going to get into it with Addison, Kaylee from Signature Performance, Devin from Workshop. But before we get started, just a few quick things. First of all, we do want to make this like a live discussion. So think of the chat like a networking event, right? Think of it like you're networking with hundreds of your peers. If you would like to chat with everyone, make sure that your chat settings are changed. Sometimes it automatically goes to like host and panelists. Change that to everyone if you want to engage in that dialogue. Also, we really do want to make this a live discussion. So as we're talking today and going through some of these topics, if something resonates with you, if you have a question, be sure to drop that in the chat. We'll be sure to bubble up any kind of like relevant questions or discussion topics about the sections that we're covering. And lastly, too, we are going to send the recording to the chat, any additional resources that we have, how to connect with our panelists on LinkedIn after the event. So you can be fully focused, fully present today. And we're just really excited. So with that, I am going to dot my screen share here so we can see everybody. And I figured we could just start with some introductions. So Devin, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, wherever and whatever it is, wherever you're watching. My name is Devin Owens. I'm the communications manager here at Workshop. I've been here about 6 months now, almost. It started in September of last year, and I've really enjoyed just diving in, learning all of the things about the company itself, but really building out the strategy of what internal communications looks like for the company that is all about internal communications and employee experience. So that's me in a nutshell. I also do our internal podcast here, so really excited to share some of my findings and chat with you all today.
Awesome. Thanks, Devin. Hi, everyone. My name is Kaylee Hahn. I work at Signature Performance with Addison, just here on the panel as well today. I'm our Senior Organizational Experience Manager. So what that means is I get the pleasure of helping oversee our internal communications team, our digital media team, and our employee events team. So we have a lot of fun things happening at Signature, and it's great to just have a hand in the creative and strategic approach to it. So Signature Performance, if I can spare you a few informational details on it. So we're a healthcare administration company. We're based in the United States, and our goal is to lower administrative costs and burdens by improving care and provider experience through people, process, and technology solutions. We're in both public and private healthcare sectors. And we're really focusing our services right now on rev cycle solution, healthcare IT consulting, technology and system implementations. And we have a claims and contact center solution right here in Omaha, Nebraska. And we branched out to be nationwide. So we're about 20 years old and we are nationwide of 1,200 associates. And regardless of the industry, your product, if you're B2B, B2C, we know one thing is the same. Employees not only want, but deserve an exceptional employee experience. Our founder and CEO is really keen on that. He knows the positive investment, return on investment for positive experiences. So we're here today to share a little small bit of one of our positive experiences, which is podcasting. So I'll kick it over to Addison now to explain more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Kaylee. My name is Addison Stoddard. I'm digital producer here at Signature Performance. I handle the podcast as we're about to talk today, but also handle other audio and visual work that the company needs done, training, education, that sort of stuff. I've been with Signature for about 10 years. First side of that was more of a marketing communications bent. I was writing emails, reaching out to people, creating like events, that sort of stuff. But then in March of 2020, if anybody remembers that date, we went mostly remote. Office parties and after hours and seeing people in the office changed. So I was able to pivot into this digital production role and really start creating things that people could connect with over the internet, work from home, just make us feel like a community. And part of that was the podcast to the Signature Edge. So I've been doing that for about 3 years. There's actually an iteration of the podcast before that called Training Wheels. I think the Signature Edge is really the one we get to fly with. And that's been going great for the whole time. And about a year ago, I actually started a second podcast that I host myself. The Edge I produced with 3 hosts we'll talk about later, but I started hosting a podcast myself called On the Job With, which allows us to visit with associates across the company in different positions. They can explain their role so everybody at the company can see how everybody contributes. So that being said, did want to ask a little icebreaker for everybody in the chat. Podcasts. How fast are you listening to that? I would love to see that in the chat. Please, nobody scare me.
Listen to. Oh my gosh.
So I worked myself up to 1.8. I realized that I'm going crazy and I have worked myself back down to 1.5 and things are better.
And things are better.
Yeah.
1.5. Yeah. A lot of different speeds in there. I'm super excited. Yes, that seems very healthy. I'm excited to dive into the conversation today. I wanted to kick things off. I know we're seeing more and more companies start internal podcasts and get into them. I know it's come up on past webinars of ours. Our CEO, Rick, just did a webinar with Reagan and touched on internal podcasts. And that was like the most of the questions that came through. So why, to everyone here, why do you think companies are starting internal podcasts now more so than ever?
Yeah, I'll jump in there first. I think there's, like we talked about, this really a desire to go deeper with our storytelling and understanding how work is happening for folks, right? So we're really wanting to learn, like, not only just what you do, but like how that work in the rest of the company or organization. So there's really this desire to get down to a granular level of understanding of what do you do at work, but then how does it impact the larger company or organization? I've also seen like an uptick in just companies across the board doing podcasts, whether they're internal or external. And I think it really allows you to elevate some voices that might not otherwise have been heard, right? So you have these internal contributors and really subject matter experts who, if you didn't ask them, you wouldn't know this wealth of knowledge that they have to share with the company. And so I think it's really just diving deep into that storytelling aspect and then getting really specific with what can your employees share with one another beyond just like a high level report of the work that they're doing.
I love that. Yeah. Addison or Kaylee, what do you think?
Everything Devin said is absolutely yes. And I'm seeing a lot of things I'm nodding my head and smiling at in the chat too. I love seeing all the comments. So I hope that keeps going for the rest of the hour we're together. Something I'll add and build on. are a couple of trends that I learned about last week. I went to Qualtrics X4 Experience Management Summit in Salt Lake City. So that's really cool if you're in the employee listening or customer listening space. If you want to write that down for professional development approvals next year, you want to think about that. But anyway, on the main stage, we heard from Danny Meyer, and he's the founder of Union Square Hospitality Group. That might not mean anything to you, but Shake Shack might ring a bell with everybody. So that's one of his more famous spots in that group. Anyway, the employee experience trends he was reporting on, I think, are a perfect explanation for the curiosity of a podcast. Because let's be super clear, a podcast is not an important info channel. This is not where you're cascading an important office update. It's not where you're putting out HR updates. What it is, it's a deeply intentional way to foster a sense of trust and belonging. And it's really targeted at those you want to be part of your company culture. Maybe they're your champions, your cheerleaders. So some of the things he said is that employees are really valuing a built common language. So if you're listening to a podcast, you're going to start hearing things over and over from your host, and you're going to feel like you're belonging to something inside, and you're almost creating shortcuts of your brand's identity. So if you're building belonging trust, you're just creating natural dialogue with your team. Afson, do you have anything else?
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Kaylee. I was going to say, what we're doing with podcasts a lot is it helps really, I think you can control your brand with it and really control like the conversation you're having. So as you were saying, building that common language, I know our hosts we always go back to our signature way tenets, how the company is run, how we do our work. And then also like, I know something we visited a lot is like the power of saying no, or sorry, lost my words here. Solving complex problems. That's what I was trying to say. So it's like, how do you move forward in business? Something we talk about often is you have to be able to solve more complex problems moving forward. And generally that leads to a bigger impact and bigger success. Something I saw in the chat that also stuck out to me, a couple of you webinar attendees were talking about it's easy to double task with a podcast. So you continue to work, listening to your ear. And then also people want to hear from leaders within your company, or they want to hear from like an authority figure within your company. And when I say authority figure, that doesn't exactly mean your CEO. It could be somebody who has a really good personality, the face of your company. We all have those people around the office, or somebody, maybe Kelsey or Devin, who might appear more in front of people. Like somebody like that, people want to hear what they're seeing on the inside of the company. It's like a little friend in your ear, personal connection. Like when I listen to this podcast, I might be in Salt Lake City. I might be in London. I saw Paris. I saw Toronto. But I can be in the office or know what's happening in meetings or boardrooms that I might not be part of, and just know what the culture is of the company.
Yeah. I love that. I've seen also too a lot of kind of comments, questions come through about what topics to do. I want to cover that in a bit, but I first wanted to chat just if you each can talk about like why you specifically started an internal podcast for your company, and like then how did you see a need for it, or maybe talk a little bit of backstory on your podcast.
Hey,
I was going to say, I'll take that, Kaylee. For signature performance, as I mentioned earlier, the start of the pandemic was really a huge catalyst for us needing to reach our employees in a different way, complete sea change. I didn't go back and run the numbers, but I would say 5% of our company was remote in 2020 and in March of 2020. And by the end of March of 2020, 85% of our company was remote. So it was very important for us to come up with these new communications channels. We revamped our email communications. We created Signature Live. We created an in-house television program called Signature Live that our people could join once a week. And on top of that, as I mentioned, we did the podcast. So the podcast was a really great way of not cascading information, but a really good way of continuing those sort of branded communications and water cooler conversations that our people were hearing just being in the office. As I mentioned, I think we had about 500 to 600 people in one of our offices in Omaha, Nebraska. And it was, as it should have been, a ghost town by the end of March. So for us, truly the catalyst was looking at that work from home environment that's since become hybrid, but making sure we were reaching people where they were.
Yeah. And I would say for workshop, it's worth noting like the difference in our company sizes. Keely, I don't know if you mentioned how large is Signature Performance as far as employee count?
1,200.
Okay. So 1,200. And then workshop, I think our latest count was 77. So we're looking at two very different size and the number of employees that we're even distributing in internal students. And so for workshop, it was a little bit more think of it like exploratory or even innovation. So the conversation of an internal podcast actually started even before I started at the company. And so I was really fortunate to really sync up with the leadership team and align on wanting to do this thing, but it was something that was already in motion in the company. But like I said earlier, it was really this intentional opportunity to deep dive into specific topics and think about as the company was really growing and scaling, right? Because when I started, we were minus almost like 20 employees. So we were even smaller than we are now, but it's grown really quickly. And so with that growth, we wanted to make sure that everybody still felt really close to not only our values, where we were going, but the people that they were working with side by side. And that's also our team is distributed, right? So we have folks who are in our Omaha HQ, but we also have folks who are remote or folks who are hybrid. So really wanting to keep that why really top of mind for folks, I think is a driving force of why our internal podcast came to be and is still around today.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I've started to see quite a few questions about like tech and technology and what tools to use. So I want to get into that in a bit. But I first want to talk about who the audience is for an internal podcast and you talked a little bit about this, but how are you tailoring content to different segments of your employee base? I know we had a question. What about global audience with like language barriers? Any advice or suggestions there?
Yeah, I can definitely hit on the first part of that question. We don't have the notion of a language barrier in ours, but that's definitely a good point for us to go over. I'd love to hear any ideas in the chat too.
Yeah.
And so, in terms of your audience, I briefly said podcasts are not for important information in terms of like pertinent job stoppage details. So that also means podcasts are not made with the goal to have 100% viewership listening employees. It's okay that it's not reaching everyone. It's not going to be everyone's cup of tea. You might not have people who know how to listen to a podcast, and that is just fine. However, once you do find your group that is resonating with your story, you're immediately creating your brand advocates. They are going to amplify and recircle. They're going to bubble up the conversations, maybe some of the buzzwords, the ideas that they're hearing your host talk about. And they're just helping build that culture and experience that your team is working so hard to create. And it's just like free extra cascades of what you're doing so hard to do. We started the Signature Edge with the tagline in mind, inspiring stories and practical insights to sharpen your leadership edge. Signature Edge, your edge.
I love that.
So our podcast has grown in communication goals and audience reach since then. Our primary target, of course, is our staff. Like we said, we're just over 1,000 nationwide. Next, we've organically gotten a large following among potential new hires and potential partners or affiliates. We're going to get into some cool stories on that later. And then third, another organic form of listeners are familial listeners. So it's pretty adorable and a true testament of our culture that we might have a signature spouse or child tuning into our show as well.
I love that. And for the global audience too, I've seen some advice come through the chat. Sounds like there's a couple AI tools that might be able to help out with that. Notebook LM was one I saw. And just a reminder too, we will send out the chat afterwards so you can get all of these great tidbits and advice from the chat as well. Like I said, I've seen a lot of kind of questions already come through of what tools and technology you all have. So I wanted to jump down there. What equipment really is required to get this internal podcast off the ground? Like when you three were looking to start the internal podcast, what was like the top 3 things that you were like, we need to have these?
Yeah. I feel like Addison, you're really good to answer this question first.
Yeah. I was going to say it's a podcast. So a mic, definitely a quality mic. I probably will screw up my audio touching this, but I use a Snowball. Our host uses Snowball. One of my hosts is remote and he appears to have an entire radio setup in his office. I have a feeling he's doing his own podcast when he's not on Signature Edge. But mic is definitely probably your biggest factor. Clear audio. And it's not just clear audio. People get really weird about what they listen to. If you heard about people can't stand chewing, don't eat on your podcast. But people don't like chewing. People get really weird about static or maybe stuff like that. So definitely a clear quality mic is it. And those don't have to be too expensive. You can easily get one for $50 to $100. Hopefully it falls into either your budget or your company's budget if you guys want to start a podcast as well. I actually usually just edit. We do video content with it as well. So I'm able to reach the audio quality we want when I'm doing in Premiere. So I just either export as an MP3. I saw the video if I want to export for social sharing or something like that. I know there's free tools you can use to do that audio editing. I'm lucky enough to have an Adobe license through the company, so it's easy for me to use that. And then we're using Spotify to host. And I don't know if I want to get deeper into that right now, but Spotify has served all of our needs for our internal audience and the goals we have for the podcast. I know there's higher end editing, Riverside FM, if anybody's ever heard of that sort of stuff. It's all fantastic. But if you're starting a podcast or really just want to dip your toe in the water, you don't got to spend a ton of money. Especially a lot of people say record 5-10 episodes and never release. It's just practice for your hosts. So don't go big first. Get in there with a quality mic. Make sure you cleared out ums and ahs and pauses and roll from there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Devin.
I was going to say, one of the things that we did was we actually contracted a partner to support us getting started with that because we don't have, internal expertise per se when it comes to podcasts. Like I'm an avid podcast listener, but I had never actually recorded a podcast before formally. And so we worked with someone externally and they brought us some ideas on like how you can record. Here's the best place to set up. And so one of the things that I really encourage folks to do is think about some of the podcasts that you love, right? And think about what steps that they have to take to get there for the audio quality to sound like that. So what Addison was saying of minimize the background noise and distraction, really practice and work on like your speaking cadence and asking meaningful questions that warrant a response beyond yes or no, right? But it also allows you to think about what is the prep work that you're doing either as like the host or like the main conversation starter, and also the folks that are on the podcast with you, making sure that they feel really confident to speak to whatever the topic is really helpful as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Addison, back to yours too. There was a question in the chat with Spotify. Does that mean anyone can listen? How are people keeping them strictly for internal use? Andrea is wondering.
Yeah, Kelsey, I think that's actually maybe come up for a few people. I've seen that in the chat as well. I'm very lucky. We are totally fine with our podcast being public facing. When it comes to editing, I just make sure if we ever tell like a story, you make sure there's nothing proprietary anyway, where we say the client, not the client name, that sort of stuff. But other than that, I haven't really had to experiment this round with privacy settings on podcasts. That being said, when we were doing the first iteration of the podcast, we were actually using, and I'm sorry if I don't have a wider knowledge of all of the millions of podcast hosting platforms. We were using one called Podbean, not an endorsement, just something. It worked. It was an endorsement, but that allowed us to have that private, our ability to keep the podcast more private, not public facing. Actually, the first iteration of our podcast was specifically meant for our management group. So that was okay. We were using Podbean then. I'm sorry if it's not fresh in my mind, but that was about 3.5, 4 years ago. So.
Got it.
Else you could jerry rig, if you will, if you're trying to just beta the idea if it's even going to stick, if people want more content, you can record a Zoom recording and then cut the audio in a pod or in a platform called Premiere. You can use GarageBand on your iPhone, whatever GarageBand is on Android. I don't know. Sorry, Team iPhone. But what you could do is just create a save slide, design some graphics, get your graphic team involved, and you could do an unlisted video on YouTube. And then you just have a direct URL to share to people. And then YouTube, you can find that on your desktop, your employees' computers. You could text it to them and it can be streamed as audio. So that's like a workaround if you want to play with it with low budget. Pretty good.
Yeah, we do quite a few. Thank you, Kim. That was exactly the point I was going to make as well. I was going to say, we do quite a bit with unlisted YouTube audio and video internally. The only caveat I will say, if it is proprietary or you are concerned about the podcast sharing information you do not want out, unlisted is a great way to share with people, but it does not stop them from sharing. So
True. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say yeah, exactly. So for our podcast, and I'm like specifically not revealed the name yet because I love a good buildup. So I'm still calling it Workshops Podcast. We'll get to it later. But we actually do use a platform called Captivate, which allows us to privately host the podcast itself, right? So in order to access it, you have to be like uploaded on the back end. So I add in folks' email address, and then whenever we have new hires, I'll add them there, or folks leave the company, whatever the case may be. But the really cool thing about this also is I wanted to make sure that the user experience was very native to what folks are already doing. So the really cool thing is all of our employees, if they have an iPhone specifically, again, sorry to our Android friends, you can actually access our Talk Shop. Oh my gosh, I just revealed them.
The build-up is here.
The build-up is here. You can actually access our podcast on your Apple podcast, right? So it's really cool because when I'm listening to my other things, the podcast, it filters in with everything else that I'm listening to and makes it a really easy listening experience. And so for us, privacy was important, but also ease of access, because we didn't really want folks to have to go to a million different links to find it, because then that's going to impact your engagement, right? If it's like a burden to get to, I wanted it to be really easy for folks. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that.
And thank you
Before,
I was going to say, thank you for sharing that, Captivate. As I said, I'm learning too in this webinar. So I'm taking a few notes on things like this. I am paying attention to the chat. It seems like some people have some solutions their own they're sharing. So thank you for sharing that in the chat.
yeah, that's awesome. Before we move on from tools and technology too, we do have a question. How do you maintain quality for remote guests? I've heard about mailing them a microphone. That feels burdensome. If they have to mail it back and costly. If you have experienced this in the chat, definitely give advice there. But I wanted to throw it over to our panelists. Any kind of remote experience there?
Yeah, I'll jump in here. We actually did a whole episode that was remote. So we had some folks who were here in the building, and Haley said earlier, we just jumped on Zoom and then exported that audio, because one of the things that we didn't want to happen with the podcast is limiting it to the folks who just worked at HQ, right? Because again, that's not going to be able to get that diverse range of voices heard if we just do the folks who are geographically closest to us. So Zoom was the way that we did it, and it was really easy. So yeah, it's definitely doable. And like I said, if you already have a Zoom account, and even if you have, I think the free version, I think you get up to like 30 to 45 minutes of free recording anyway. So it's a really great option for distributed teams.
Yeah.
Sorry, Kelsey.
No, good.
I'm a huge pro video, cut the audio, because you're going to get so much different behavior and sound out of your post. If they can see each other reacting to what you're saying, you have a barrier. If you're only on audio, you're still going to have a good podcast if you're well rehearsed and you thought it through. But getting to see people's reactions really is just going to keep your conversation that much more captivating for listeners. So whether it's Zoom or all together, I think it's worth looking at.
And with the way our IT team works here at Signature, we obviously, as I said, 85% work from home, if not more. Everybody is mailed equipment, because we have, even if you're a call center representative all the way to the top, you have one-on-ones with your manager. We really prioritize video in those communications. So really everybody at our company has been distributed a webcam, that sort of stuff. So luckily it has not been an issue on our end having to record remote associates.
Yeah. Yeah. I saw in the chat too, something to elevate the audio. If you clip the audio from a Zoom or even just download your Zoom video, a tool like Descript, where you can upload it, they actually have just a toggle button where you put studio sound, and it is mind blowing. I don't know if any of you have experimented with that, but it's incredible. Awesome. Okay, let's go on a little bit about, I've seen some things bubble up in the chat, and I want to talk a little bit about a host. Do you need a host? What's the format of each of your podcasts? And also, what makes a good internal podcast host?
Napson for a little bit. So Amson and I have been working together for over 5 years now. We do host. So Amson is a host and producer of the Signature Edge. And we also have 3 executive voices who are hosts. We have 2 who are in our organizational experience team. That's an easy win because they understand the brand. They know what our experience goals are. They know our language. There was no learning curve there. They are bought into what we believe in because they wrote what we believe in. And then we also have an executive in our business development side. So that keeps us super sharp on what our company is focusing on in terms of growth and revenue. So we have Mark, Amy, and Chris. Shout out to them, and Addison. And I think it's great if you have a handful of equipped people who know how to host a podcast for a couple reasons. You're going to get great dialogue between them. You're going to learn little quirks about them. You'll maybe find some inside jokes if there's tensions with their marital life at home, like in a healthy way. We all have, oh, you can't shut the cabinet. Come on, Will. But it's fun to just get to know people if you're going to have them in your headphones over and over again. That's one of the most intimate places you can be with a coworker is in your head. And it's also great that there's a few so you don't feel burnt out being the only one doing it. It takes a lot of consistency to run a podcast. So there's some solo episodes. Maybe Mark and Chris just do it. Maybe Addison does it. Maybe Addison and Amy do it. The hosts, yes, definitely think about them. And then welcoming employees onto the podcast is also great. I know Addison has a few stories, I think, for a few later. questions on that one, but that's our take.
Yeah. So when we actually first started our podcast, we didn't have a host, and that was intentionally done. And so what was really cool about doing it that way was we were able to get every department represented in the first season. Our season was 10 episodes. And so it was really cool to hear from folks in sales and product and marketing. But after some employee feedback, we did a couple of like full surveys, and even just me as the person who was really driving that boat, just touch base with folks and ask them how the experience was going. It bubbled up for us that our employees are looking for, again, a more like native experience, right? When you listen to most podcasts or even like a radio show, right? There's always someone hosting or someone who is the steerer of that conversation. And so for season 2, which we are 2 episodes in now, we did decide to have a host, and that host is me. Our CEO made that decision on the fly, really. We were having a conversation and he was just like, Devin, I think you should do this. And again, one of the great parts of our company size right now is our ability to be very nimble with this sort of decision making. I will say, looking at like season 1 versus season 2, having a host, again, just really does help steer that conversation, because if you come to work and you're a software engineer and somebody asks you to be on a podcast, you might be like, what? Like, you're excited about the opportunity, but it's not something that you're doing every day. So having a person who can make you feel like it's a conversation versus an interview or even an interrogation really helps it feel very natural. I know that we also, like, some folks were asking about the length of time. I don't want to, again, get too ahead of myself, but I think you all will be quite surprised by how long our podcasts are and how high our listen rate is too.
Yeah. I think we can jump into length here in a second, but I did want to talk about like elevating those internal voices. How are you going about getting guests for episodes? And can you walk us through that process?
Yeah, I'll start. I was going to, for Signature Edge, 9 times out of 10, the 3 hosts do film together. We've been really lucky about that. Managing 3 people, especially at their level within the organization, can be a little bit difficult. I actually record the podcast on schedule, if we can say on schedule, 9 days before air date. So we have a couple days within that week and a full next week in case they're at conferences, they're sick, they're unavailable. We have not missed an episode yet. So the strategy has worked. In general, as we mentioned earlier, how do you sharpen your leadership edge? A lot of our podcasts are about leadership topics. So there's the power of saying no, how to work with hybrid teams, like that sort of stuff. So really evergreen content that the hosts themselves can speak to. So we do occasionally have guests with the host. In fact, our latest episode was a one-off with Amy and then her best friend at work, which is a concept we're very passionate about here at Signature, having a best friend at work. But in general, the content's usually pretty evergreen. So you don't have to worry about guests too often.
Yeah. And for our podcast, what I did is I wanted to have, again, in season 1, we did a diverse cadence of different voices. And so I looked at how can I make sure that every department is represented. Part of that is thinking about, okay, some departments have 10, 20 people. Who are the best voices to into that who can really give us a deep dive into what that team are working on or what is on the horizon. And so it was literally just a spreadsheet and like making sure and zooming out of, okay, we have representation here, and making sure that we also didn't have too many episodes back. We're like, so serious. Like, we're also a company that likes to have fun. And so even when I was planning that, I was like, this isn't so much a strategic priority, but it does happen to the culture of who we are and our approach to doing work. So I think having that like mix of content types where you have very strategic things and you have things where we're just yap. People love a good yap session around here.
Yes.
Having that mix was really great too.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Yeah, podcasts are a great platform for storytelling. We shared a few wins at the beginning. Think about, is that a story you can tell on behalf of your employer, your brand, your product? So don't let the idea of storytelling or content planning intimidate you, because content planning is so fun. I could think about just pulling inspiration from HBO. They do a great job promoting all their new TV series throughout the year. And they make it fun because they're not just dropping episodes every week, but they're airing behind the scenes mini episodes. They have a podcast that dives into the inner workings of last night's episodes. They do sit downs with their casts. And it's like, why does this work for their audience? Because first of all, you have a show everyone's obsessed with. Okay. The parallel, your employees who are listening to your podcast are probably obsessed with their jobs, right? You got buy-in right there. And then that is a group who's hungry to learn more about what just happened or what's going on in your company. So a parallel for us is a specific example. For several years, our company sponsors our associates and then has representation at the DAV Winter Sports Clinic. A lot of people in our company knew that we sent a handful of associates last year. It was a great week for them to really give back and be a community with each other and then the greater community at the Winter Sports Clinic in Colorado. So people knew that was going on. They're like, that's cool. So one of our podcast episodes that was pretty timely was interviewing the associates who went and represented Signature. And it was almost like a campfire. They got to tell stories of what it was like to experience that. So for me, that's a really cool opportunity to share a story. It's an easy win for you because it already happened. You didn't really create work. You didn't create an event to have to talk about. You're just like perked up your ears to actually listen and learn what would be maybe a good story for people to listen to.
Yeah. On the topic of storytelling, elevating voices, we've seen a lot of questions in the chat of length of episode, and it sounds like there's some different topics you all are covering. So let's answer the burning question of how long an episode for an internal podcast should be. I know we're trying to get that deeper dive into those topics. So yeah, talk a little bit about that.
Kelsey, this question is so fun because I think there's so many different ways to answer it, but I'll just be super honest. So for our podcast, it's averaging about 40 minutes. It's meaty, okay? We are having some really in-depth conversation, but what we're finding is our employees want that. We tried the shorter episodes. We did something that was 15 to 20 minutes, and surprisingly, it was not as well listened to. So what we can do is take some qualitative data. Again, we can do those pulse surveys and get that feedback and even just those one-to-one touch points. And what we found that works for our company, I want to emphasize that what works for us is the longer episodes because it allows folks to deep dive. They can listen to it while they're working or perhaps on their commute to and from work. But it also signals that there's a lot to listen to here, right? It's sometimes when it's a little bit more brief, maybe it doesn't feel like I need to give as much attention to it. So that's what's worked really well for us. We'll still keep playing around with the cadence, but in the chat, I saw a question of should you do scripted or non-scripted? And so when we are planning for our podcast, we're planning for 35 to 40 minutes.
Evan, someone also asked, can you give an example of maybe content on one of your 40-minute podcast episodes?
Yes, sure. So our very first episode of season 2, I did with our CEO, Rick, and our CMO, Jamie. And right a couple of days or maybe a week or two right before that, we did a refresh of our website. And so I really wanted to talk to them from a leadership perspective about like, why did we make this change? What does this mean for the company? How can employees communicate it? What can we all do to support this? Not a new direction, but a shift in the way that we are positioning ourselves within the market. Another thing that I will say too is very similar to external podcasts is we're not just talking about that for 40 straight minutes. I introduced a segment called Listen to Learn, which is based on one of our values. And I'm actually asking them, like, what are you all listening to? What are you influenced by in your personal lives? And I think one of the ways that you can really start to make a podcast feel like relatable and personable is you're not like just diving straight into the topic. You're warming up to it. In that episode, the Super Bowl was like the 2 days before. So we talked about the Super Bowl. So I would also encourage folks like, it's okay to have some like time and place markers in your podcast. Like, they don't have to be super duper evergreen that if somebody listened to it 2 weeks or 2 months from now, it's, oh, this is not relevant. Like talking about the Super Bowl and what our chief marketing officer took away from the ads is going to be beneficial, whether you listen to it right after or whether you're a new employee who listens to it a year later.
Yeah, I like that.
I couldn't agree with Devin more. We call it host warm up in the outline that we provided the host beforehand. But it's just a good way to those time markers. We did talk about the Super Bowl. I like to plug in signature events. Like we're really lucky to work at a company that does promote. We call them open forums on various topics. We have like our Founders Day celebration, which is here. So it's always a good way to talk about, hey, as I said, you had to notate, we're recording 9 days in advance. So are we going to be a week out from the Super Bowl? Or are we a week before Founders Day? Like that sort of stuff to make sure that you're still timely and that people can participate or still interested in what you're talking about. But it's just a really great way to do that host warm up. Length of podcast.
Yeah.
We very specifically started the podcast as 20 minutes. That did not work. It has creeped up to 30. But I remember that was a lot of our internal marketing for the podcast was fold your laundry, walk the dog. And again, if you're listening at 1.5 times speed, it's 14 minutes. Like, just really just blow through it if you need to. But our hosts have so much to say. 20 minutes,
Yeah.
20 minutes did not work out. So I think we've stabilized it around 30, but it did creep up to 30. But really, as I said, before they go into the recording chamber, or recording session, sorry, there's no chamber, recording session, they're provided with an outline for whatever the topic might be, things to tie in. I make little notes of, you can tie this to one of our internal learning classes. You can tie this into something they might have seen recently in an email, or they might want to sign up for something coming up in a week. And in general, the hosts do a really good job of sticking to that with their own expertise and their own experiences. We can go off the rails, but we generally stick to the topic. But that 20-minute outline usually comes to about 30 minutes for us. And Devin, to what you said too, it does not cost us leadership or listenership. Sorry, it's not cost us listenership. I would say as the podcast has grown, listenership has increased along with those length increases as well.
Yeah. It sounds like both of the podcasts here, the time has fluctuated. So it sounds like just test and see what works well for your audience. Yeah, I love that.
Just to get back to it really quickly, Kelsey, that does not mean that we always hit 30 minutes or always stick to 30 minutes. In fact, the one with Amy and our coworker Damesy for that best friend at work episode, that was only 17, but they're best friends at work. They have a common language. They could speak a little faster than some. So sometimes we're not trying to hit 30 minutes, but in general, we don't have any issues with increased length.
Yeah. I want to make sure we have some time for promotion of podcasts and some metrics and benchmarks. But real quick, before we move on to those sections, how many episodes do you think should be in a season? Is there a right answer?
Yeah, I floated this a little bit earlier and said, so our season 1 was 10 episodes. So that was all we did. And we're going to aim for the same thing for season 2. I know a question I've seen come up is like, how frequently are you deploying those? I will say I came in really, I just started. I was energized during the podcast. We're going to release weekly. That almost burned me out. That was very difficult to keep up with the cadence of not only scheduling. I mean, our Google calendars are packed, recording, and then deploying to the company. So we've backed up a little bit to bi-weekly, but we're still going to keep that 10 episode cadence and see how that does for us.
For us, we actually started out the edge with a few, I would call them series, not seasons. But when we first started, guiding principles at Signature, we call them the Signature way, just things to keep in mind when you're doing your work, how Signature prefers to do them. Be a go-to.
Like values on steroids.
Yeah, thank you. We also have values too, but be a go-to, I'm not really solid, but be a go-to person, make those around you better, be a difference maker, those sort of things. We actually did a series it actually started off as an interview series where we had the host interview an associate for that. We got through the 8. Those were really well received. I thought that was a great way to kick off and get buy-in because you had the host and then you brought in somebody who can tell their friends or the department might want to hear what their department member said, that sort of stuff. From there, we moved on to another thing we have going on at Signature, which is our Aloha Well-Being Framework. That's a whole nother webinar. But so we had people interview for that or talk about some of those principles as well. I thought that was really good buy-in. But beyond that, we generally just keep our every other week cadence. Now, on top of that, I'm doing another podcast that comes in about every 6 weeks. And then recently, we revisited the series with a leadership series. We were lucky enough to have all of our C-suite sit down with us individually to go over leadership lessons from their career as well. So we jump in and out of series, but the topics are engaging.
Awesome. Love that. Just have a little over about 15 minutes left. I want to jump into how do you introduce a new internal podcast to employees and generate that excitement? So you had all of your strategy in place, your goals, your outcome. How are you actually getting this thing off the ground and introducing it to employees?
Yeah. So people need to see something 7 times before it sticks. So when you start rolling your eyes, when you're typing your mission statement or your podcast objectives, that's when you know it's finally probably starting to stick with your people. Refuge key, leveraging the channels that you know are already effective for your employees. For us, it's internal communications. We rely heavily on the inbox. We have an intranet, relying on our manager group to cascade information. So really just creating a really exciting launch plan for it. Maybe you host a town hall where you all get to do like a listening party or a watch party for the first podcast episode. It's really important to get leadership buy-in first because people believe in what their bosses believe in. And it's also just a nice common courtesy to let your executives know, then maybe let your managers know, and then let your people know. So that way your front lines aren't asking questions about it. And then a manager maybe doesn't feel perfectly informed to help them. You just want to give your managers the tool for success to help you amplify what you're on.
Yeah, we actually took advantage of the timing of the announcement of our podcast, which is Talk Shop. I slipped it earlier. It's called Talk Shop. But I started in September 24 and we announced it at our October retreat. So that was an opportunity that we knew everyone was going to be in the same room. There was already a lot of excitement about some other internal announcements. And so we really just built and leveraged what was already happening to share that. One of the really cool things that's actually happened since launching the podcast itself and then going through season 1 and now into season 2 is we've actually had an employee, like not prompted at all, create an entire Slack channel dedicated just to talking about the podcast. But it was really cool to see. And this employee, is actually remote, right? So that even shows that this is a person who's not at our HQ all the time, but they were really just bought into what we were doing. And so now every time an episode releases, we encourage our employees to go there and talk about what they heard. Not every time is it like busy and bustling, but it's just the space that was employee created, it's employee led, and it really allows for, yeah, like Kaylee said, it's that brand advocate. We didn't ask for that, but it's just a really telling sign that this podcast is landing and it's a good culture ad for our company.
Yeah, I love that. Addison, Kaylee, can you talk a little bit about your the channels you use to promote your podcast?
Of course, I'm lucky enough to have Kaylee and our coworker Bree at the helm of our email communications. And then our other coworker, Allie, in terms of social, we have an internal Facebook and some LinkedIn presence as well. Again, as I said, I'm very lucky that the podcast is communicated through email. We post sort of video clips within either our internal Facebook or LinkedIn to get people excited about the topic with pertinent quote or something to hook people into listening to the whole thing. And then also we do have this weekly sort of television show that we have as well. We have great buy-in from the host. So I've had them actually on, we call it Signature Live. We've had them on Signature Live a couple of times to just, hey, we're launching the podcast. Like the podcast did a bit of a rework about 40 episodes in, just like they come in and give you a refresher. I just think that FaceTime, as Kaylee said, you see it 7 times or you hear about it 7 times, you're more likely to remember it.
Awesome. All right. We've seen a lot of questions, conversations bubble up in the chat about benchmarks and metrics. So let's dive into it. Any benchmarks with internal podcasts, or what metrics are you all looking at kind of tracking to see if it is a success or not?
I think the low hanging fruit here is just listenership. So looking at what percentage of the company is listening to the podcast and then identifying if there's any drop points, right? So that was going to be one of the ways that we were able to find out if the 40-minute episode, for example, was working or not, if we saw that people were dropping off around 20 minutes or so. Now, because podcasts are something that people can listen to on their own time and at their own pace, you also have to take those insights with a grain of salt, right? Because I know I'm notorious for on my drive to work, I'll start a podcast. I might get to 27 minutes out of 40, and then I'll pick it up on the way home, right? So you have to take a little bit of that quantitative data and then couple it with qualitative. So that's why I mentioned earlier doing those surveys, asking employees like how they're receiving it, looking to those ambassador-led channels like our Slack channel to see, are we getting buzz on this? How is this performing? So I think I would highly encourage looking at your listen rate. And then depending on how you're deploying it, for us at Workshop, we deploy the episodes initially through email. So I'm able to see, based on the email metrics, I can see how many folks clicked it, where they clicked at, how long they were actually on the email, because we do a short recap there too. So I would start with those.
And for me personally, Spotify has done a really great job of tracking the metrics we are looking for as well. I like to make sure that the audience we're going after is the ones that are listening to the podcast. So what I really like about Spotify is it can do age, gender, location breakdowns. And I was going through this webinar as well, just looking into what our most recent stats were. It was a pretty good mirror of who our employees are. So it's 80% Nebraska, 80% Nebraska, a lot of early mid-30s to mid-50s listeners. I think it was 70% female listenership, Signature 77% women-led. So it's like, okay, that's all about right as well. As I said, we're tracking the completion rates. We generally have, or complete listens, we generally have roughly 50 to 70% full completion rates on the podcasts.
Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, Addison has great stats. And something that he wrote in our notes that we're sharing back and forth to prepare for today was the number of downloads within the first 72 hours. And it's usually around 60, which is pretty good for us. Again, you're not looking for your entire company to listen. So when I see that stat, I'm not like, cool number. What I'm actually hearing is that our podcast is helping build positive habits among our listeners. If someone's listening within the first 72 hours, that means they're looking forward to the podcast. They know it's what they're doing on every other Monday morning. When we drop it in our Monday memo, our weekly bulletin, we include in our little parentheses 25 minutes. Like they know, okay, I'm going to have 25 minutes of head down work or it's my lunch break. Like I'm going to go listen to it. So I think that's really cool that you get to be part of someone's flow and habits. And it's just really reassuring that people are adopting your company's culture and the values you live out and they're leading it on their own.
Yeah, I love that. Devin, I know you had mentioned feedback a little bit. Kaylee, Addison, curious what strategies you have to gather that employee feedback and evolve your podcast based on their input to really get that buy-in from your employees.
Yeah.
I was going to say we end every podcast with a call to action and an email, Addison podcast@signatureperformance.com. By the way, if anybody has any questions about the podcast@signatureperformance.com. But we generally have that. We actually do Q&As in our Monday memo weekly newsletter. Just if you have any questions, please submit it. What do you want to hear? What is the takeaway you got? And as I said, we have that integration with other programs within Signature that allows associates to learn more about the podcast and then interact with me or the hosts so they can help shape the podcast because it's for them. So definitely want to address things that they're interested in.
Yeah, love that. We did have a question in the chat too. I want to talk a little bit about keeping engagement up over time. Someone asked, we launched our internal podcast over a year ago, but listeners have dropped by 80%. What advice do you have for getting listens back up?
Yeah, I think something that I see Workshop believes, and I think it's maybe one of your values, but you need to meet people where they're at. Take a look at your content. Is it really matching what your employees are listening to or curious to learn about? Is it accessible to them? So something that we're looking at to improve and ramp up our communication of our podcast for 2025 is really focusing on meeting people where they're. We have a third-party texting platform that people can opt into, and you can create channels among it. So we're looking at building out a Signature Edge podcast channel, and you can really get gritty with it. You can say, are you an Apple listener? Are you a Spotify listener? Are you other? And then we can just schedule those texts to go to that automated, always updated list. First thing Monday mornings, like you're hearing it headed for first, click this link and it's already in your phone. So I think going back to your technical production of the podcast, is it working because it's accessible? Is it hard? Or is it redundant content? Stuff like that, I think is probably good to review and maybe doing a focus group with people, who used to listen, who do listen, getting some outside feedback on it. Be really helpful for you.
Yeah. I would also say, and I don't know the specifics of your internal podcast, but I would encourage you, if you haven't diversified the voices, I think there's a poem that I listened or read a long time ago, and it said, one of our favorite love songs is hearing our own voice or hearing those voices that are similar to ours. And so I would encourage you to think about the ways that you can elevate that employee voice. So maybe it is going a little bit off of your normal scheduling cadence or recording cadence and thinking about how do you just interview an employee or have a conversation with them. One of the examples that our friends at Signature Performance gave was having two work besties talk to each other and really highlight the importance of having friendship and camaraderie in the workplace. I think it's getting to the heart of the people that are at your workplace. And sometimes, again, it's not going to be super strategic or align with a business objective, but it really gets personal, which I think audio is a great tool to do that.
I love that. Awesome. We're almost right at the end here. I would love to leave attendees with just a piece of practical advice that they can take away with them. So what's one piece of advice each of you would give someone who's just starting out with their internal podcast?
Although, if we're not even at podcasts yet, let's think about how we're telling stories. So something our team really believes in is professional development and continue growing yourself. So storytelling is definitely an art, but it comes naturally with time, and that's going to really fuel you being a good podcaster. So a bunch of our team members really liked reading the book Stories That Stick by Kendra Hall. Her book focuses on how storytelling can captivate customers, influence your audience, and transform your business. So read a book. Sorry, that's a boring call to action for maybe some, but
Listen to the audio book.
listen to the audiobook. Exactly. That would be mine.
As I mentioned earlier, great podcast advice if you're just starting one is do not do the training wheels practice episodes. They might feel like full-on episodes. Maybe you'll knock it out of the park right off the bat. But in general, don't worry about getting your swim legs or anything like that and just getting comfortable in the podcasting space before you actually move into something that you want to release publicly or internally publicly. As I said, you might, in those 10 that you practice with, they might not be ready for air, but they might give you the pathway to re-record them once you're feeling more comfortable. So don't think that it's wasted space. Think of it more as practice space. And then, yeah, just get into it. Podcasting is everywhere. So I recommend it for everyone.
Yeah, I really love this question. I would say just remember that inspiration is everywhere. I jumped into the podcast here and I've always been an avid podcast listener, but now I have a different sort of ear to it. I'm looking at people's speaking cadence. I'm looking at the timing and the structure of things. And so just be inspired by what's around you. I think this community is really great for that and learning what others are doing and how you can pivot and tweak what you're doing internally to have a really, yeah. So I would recommend just being inspired by what's around you.
I love that. I want to thank everyone here for joining us, everyone who's attended today. Kaylee, Addison from Signature Performance, Devin, thank you all. And we love these live webinars. We will send out the recording, the chat. If we didn't get to your question too, we'll follow up with you. And any additional resources, I'll include that book that Kaylee suggested as well. So we'll get that all sent over to you ASAP. Thank you again, everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah. Thanks
Bye,
for
everyone.
joining.
Thank you.